So the Engineering Council of UK has set out certain conditions to meet to become a chartered engineer. And basic conditions are you have to have a bachelor's degree in engineering and a master's degree. So that is the basic criteria, but there are exceptional circumstances or other routes to become chartered. People with bachelor's degrees can become chartered. They have to go through different processes. What I'm going to talk about mainly is people who have a master's degree. I had a master's degree, which I did way after I graduated, but there are people who actually do a full master's program. They get an MEng after they graduate, and or an MSc after they graduate, and I took a long route. So let's get into the process. What I what I realized was that many people have an understanding of chartership that seems like it's so far away and you can't reach it. And that's what I felt a lot of the time, to say, am I worth it? Do I have the expertise? Do I have the knowledge to actually become chartered? And going through the process opened up my eyes to my own abilities that I wasn't aware of. And it will probably do the same for you, because we do face imposter syndrome when we are mid-career. We're saying, why am I in this position? How did I come here? And yet I seem not to know a lot of things. And that's part of the position I was in. But I was also confident in my abilities, especially my technical ability to understand and come into a situation, understand the technical problems, and solve the technical problems. Now, the chartership process starts by, in my case, the Institution of Mechanical Engineering. They assessed my degree because my degree wasn't accredited, or it wasn't on the accredited list of degrees. So the process starts by them evaluating that degree. I went through that evaluation process. I sent through my degree, I sent through my transcripts, I sent through my masters and my transcripts, my CV to the IMEC. And after about 3 months, they came back and said, well, you qualify to be recognized as a chartered engineer if you go through the application process of a chartered engineer. So I decided to look at the application form for a chartered engineer. It's on their website. I'll link it below. But what you start going through, you realize that it's a lot of work putting together the application. So one of the things that opened my eyes is a free webinar by the Institution of Mechanical Engineers that their business development team always do those webinars where they show people how to become chartered, the process, the insides and outsides of becoming chartered. So I went into those webinars trying to understand what I needed to know, what I needed to have experience in, and how to actually do the application. So I attended the webinar and they were eye-opening, totally eye-opening, because they make you understand the knowledge areas, the competences that IMEC are looking for. And those are the things that you really need to know and understand, because if you don't have the competencies or you don't meet the thresholds that they are looking for, then you will not get your chartership. So the first thing is to understand the structure of the application form itself, to understand what they are looking for, to understand the competencies they want from you, not just your technical knowledge, but they are a lot of other things that I'm going to lay out in this video that will help you to understand that you need to be a full package to become a chartered engineer. So the first thing is to go through this competence areas and see where you stand, because the first competence area is your knowledge and understanding. That is knowing the best basic principles of engineering. And this also applies to any other institution, not just the IMA Key, but to all the other institutions under the Engineering Council. They look at your knowledge and understanding, your theoretical and your practical knowledge of engineering. And what I usually advise people is that have 2 or 3 projects in your head that you've worked on in your life that showcase your abilities and as an engineer. Look throughout your career and think about the projects you've worked on, the projects where you've applied the most technical knowledge, the projects where you've used design software, the projects where you've thought long and hard about how to solve a specific technical problem. Think about those projects. Think about where they look to you as the engineer and they said, you can give us a solution. Those are the problems that you should mention. It should be a project with a budget that's reasonable, or you're working in a factory that has a significant production. You're maintaining an important machine. Some people are on power stations, some people are in factories, some people are managing big buildings. So those are projects or programs that are very important. I work in the nuclear sector and we work on different projects, and I'm on a particular project that showcased my abilities. But I've worked in the electrical sector where I was on a transformer project, a power transformer project. I've worked in the automotive sector. I've worked in the general engineering sector. So I had projects in my mind that I knew that would showcase my knowledge and that understanding. Then they also look at design, development, and solving engineering problems. So it's very similar to your knowledge and understanding, but you have to show where you've used design principles, you've used design tools. You can talk about your CAD, SolidWorks, you can talk about Inventor, you can talk about ANSYS, you can talk about all the tools that you use, MathCAD, you can talk about any tool that you've used to design and develop engineering solutions to problems. You usually mention 2 of them. Those are the problems that you expand on, that when they ask you in the interview, you can actually talk about. Don't say a problem that you didn't solve or you didn't work on. So those are your first 2 competencies: your knowledge and understanding, your design, development, and solving of engineering solutions. Then they start to go further and look at your responsibility, your management, and your leadership. So it's more than just becoming a normal engineer or a project engineer that just works on technical problems. You have to show your responsibility, your management, and leadership skills. That's why it was important for me, after having worked all those years, to look at my career as a whole. I've worked in sales, I've worked as a sales engineer, I've worked as a manager, as a workshop manager, I've worked as a project manager, and I've worked as an engineer, a project engineer. So all those, when I looked at them before I started that chartership application, I thought they were not useful, because I thought you just needed that technical understanding or that technical competence. But you're going to need the leadership, you're going to need management, you're going to need to show responsibility. Have you managed apprentices? Have you managed technicians? Have you managed other engineers? Have you managed non-engineers? Have you worked hand in hand with other stakeholders in projects that help you. If you worked in factories where you're talking to production managers, you're talking to process engineers, you're talking to the management strategy, business strategy. Have you been involved in those things? Those are the questions that you should ask yourself when you're looking at that competence. You don't have to showcase 2 or 3 projects. You can speak in general terms. And you need to know exactly what you're talking about, because they will ask you in more detail in the interview. So those are the things that you should look at in terms of the responsibility, management, and leadership. That's the third competence. Then they also look at something that's linked to this, the previous competence. They look at your communication and your interpersonal skills. So this is where we're talking about how do you interact with other people, with your colleagues, with stakeholders on a project, with your superiors, with your juniors. How do you communicate with them? How do you speak to them? How do you handle meetings? Have you organized project meetings? Have you taken minutes? Have you organized a conference? Have you organized a board meeting? Have you gone to negotiate? Because many of the times as engineers, we have to work with the financiers of projects. We need to be able to make meaningful presentations. How do you present your work? How do you think about presentations, and how do you write reports? How do you write specifications? How do you write interface documents? All those things are important. Do you know the contracts that you're working on? And do you have a sound understanding of the specifications and contracts and all the documents and the legislation wherever you're working? Do you understand the legislation that governs what you are doing? That is part of communication, because if you are working within certain parameters, you need to understand the parameters you're working under. You need to know if you're working in an if you're doing an NEC3 contract, you need to know who your stakeholders are. You need to know what an early warning is. You need to know what a technical query is. You need to know what a general communication is. You need to know how to lay out that communication, speak to the right people, speak to your commercial team, speak to your project team, speak to your project control teams, or in a factory setting, what are the lines of communication within your business? So those are the things to think about when you're putting together the application and you say, this is what I've done and this is how I've shown what I'm capable of in terms of communications and interpersonal skills. How do you relate to every other person? Are you humble enough to acknowledge that you don't know when you don't know? Are you humble enough to acknowledge that some people who don't have engineering degrees may have more experience than you and may know more than you? Because there is what we call tacit knowledge, knowledge that is not in the books, knowledge that is on the job, that people learn on the job, or people that is specific to the site you are on. Some people know that that machine, if you kick it on the corner, it works, and that's knowledge that's not in a manual. But we've faced a lot of situations where people know things but it's not written down. So those interpersonal skills will allow you to extract that information from other people and use it to your benefit and to the benefit of your company, your project, your government, and it will make you a better engineer. Then the fifth competence that they look at is, what is your personal and professional commitment in terms of engineering? And this is where they look at your CPD, your continual professional development, and they look at your ethics. They look at, do you know the of conduct of the institution you are applying to. Do you understand what they value? Do you understand environmental principles? Do you understand social principles? Do you understand ethics? Do you understand governance? Do you understand sustainability? Do you understand value engineering? All those things that are not necessarily the technical bits, but they are very important, especially in a society where we're dealing with larger issues like climate change, and and we're looking at social change. We're dealing with people who are poor, need our assistance as engineers. We need to have solutions to some of society's problems. So they want to understand if you understand those issues. Do you understand ethics? Do you understand that you have to be a person of integrity? When you sign a document, have you checked everything? When you sign off on a project, they need to be sure that when you understand what you're signing for. And also the issue of not taking bribes. As an engineer, it is important to understand that bribery is a no-no. You should never take bribes. You should never give bribes. So those are the ethical questions that they look at. So those are the things that you will write in your application, and that will showcase your ability as an engineer. So that's the process I went through, and it took me months to write these up. And then the important thing that people don't understand is you need mentors. You need people who've been through the process. And in the case of the institution of mechanical engineers or the engineering council itself, you need a sponsor. And the first sponsor should be a chartered engineer if you want to be a chartered engineer. And the second sponsor can be your line manager, and they can be chartered or not chartered. It doesn't matter. But your first sponsor should be a chartered engineer. I was fortunate enough to have my first sponsor being chartered and my second sponsor being chartered. And one thing you have to understand is they can be chartered by any institution under the engineering council. I was sponsored by a person who is a civil engineer, and he was sponsoring me as a mechanical engineer. So you should understand that it doesn't matter what institution you are applying for chartership for, you need a chartered engineer to sponsor you. So you need to foster a good relationship with people within your company and outside your company, other engineers. Ask for mentorship. Ask for people to help you to grow as a mechanical engineer, or as a civil engineer, or as an electrical engineer, as a fire engineer. All those people that are around you who have gone before you are useful, because they will be able to point you in the right direction. They'll help you develop leadership quality. They'll open up doors, and they will see the trajectory of your career and be able to sign off on your application, because that is something essential. They are going to have to provide very personal details that will prove that they are who they are to the institution you are applying for. And after that, you submit your application. It will take some months before they come back to you, and they'll say, now let's set up an interview. And some institutions will have other exams, but I'm speaking about the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. And there was an interview. It was an online interview. They spoke to me about the process, and they made me understand that it's not an ordeal. It's somewhere where you can showcase your abilities. If you wrote what you know and you know what you're talking about, 90% of the people who do these interviews pass the interviews, because they are engineers who are experienced, and you're going to be interviewed by two engineers and one person who's monitoring this and they don't usually say anything in the interview. They just moderating to see if everything is done in a fair way. So two people, two engineers will chartered engineers will interview you. They will most of the time go through those competencies A, B, C, D, E, and go through your knowledge, go through your design, go through your responsibilities and management. They'll go through your communication and interpersonal skills, and then they'll go to through your personal and professional commitment. So those are the things that they will take you through, asking you about your application, what you wrote in your application. They'll ask you to expand on it. You worked on this design. Can you tell us more about the design? What software did you use? Can you give us a bit more understanding on when you say you led this project? And one essential thing that you have to know when you're writing this application, it's I statements. You're not saying we. You're not talking about we did this or we did that. They want to understand what you did. I did this. I wrote this specification. I drew this drawing. I made this design change. I spoke to these stakeholders. They want to know exactly what you did, and how you say it will show them that you did, not your team. They're not looking at your team achievement or your group achievement. They're looking at your personal achievement in this. I know it's counterintuitive. We don't want to take credit for the work. We want our team to take credit for the work. But in this circumstance, when you're doing your CEng application, you should focus on saying I. It should always be I. And that will help you focus and try to make the story coherent, and that will help you a lot. So that is what I can share about my understanding, my process. It took me almost a year to go through this project process. I submitted my application in December, and I finally got chartered in May. But before the submitting the application, it took me months because I knew that there were competencies that I needed to think about or to further develop before I put in my application. So you may be a year away or 2 years away, or you need a few more years to work on your leadership, or to get more leadership opportunities, to work on your communications, to work on your ethics, to really understand contracts and all those things. But thinking about these things, looking forward to a CEng application is very useful. And always look for the right mentors, because no one is going to sign up as a mentor for you on the day you apply. You need to have relationships. Some companies have graduate programs and mentorship programs, but many people are mature engineers like me who have moved companies, and you're not part of those programs. So you make direct applications to the institutions. So you need to always have good relationships. The people you learned with, the people who are ahead of you, can assist you when you need to apply, but they need to know that you are a good engineer. So this is what I can share about chartership. Please subscribe and like the video, and you can ask me questions in the comments. We can have more discussions, and if you want me to go in depth in any topic, please contact me. Thank you. Goodbye.